we did is we checked with EDD on past misclassifications. 4,111 interpreters have been deemed misclassified in the last 5 years. 4,111 people, individuals who through the EDD process were deemed misclassified under Borello. And so that's one of the factors we look at. It's really hard to say, oh, you're all independent contractors, you're still under Borello, and so now you still have to go through all this process and sue. Or do we look at it and say, okay, what's causing this conflict where some interpreters want to be independent contractors, some do not? Why are some companies required to make them employees by EDD in an audit, and others are not doing that, right? Translators, which do written documentation, we didn't find misclassification suits again, so we were trying to put it into the bill. Now, we wanted a certification so that it fit the other things we talked about. You know, if you're a translator, what makes that barrier to entry higher? Certification. Well, and some translators came to us and asked us for that. Well, then we find out that there is no certification except by one group, and it's only for Spanish, and so we're leaving out a lot of people that we didn't mean to leave out. That creates a whole nother issue. We allow people to be translators just because they assert to speaking the language, and so the barrier to entry becomes very low, especially in a state like California where you have a lot of multilingual people, and so it's ripe for exploitation. We're working with translators, but that's there's not the level of control. You do it from your home. We're not worried about workers' compensation. You set your own hours, all of those things, right? Interpreters are special, and we're trying to figure out how do we stay true to the Dynamex ruling, and we have done that. I appreciate people say winners and losers and random exemptions, and that to me, I get it. If you haven't spent, I guess, the last 3 years looking at this case, looking at all the misclassification cases, looking at all these agencies' misclassification suits under Borello, talking to all of these workers, then it does look random. But there was nothing random about the things selected. We have been systematically going through them and trying to figure out. With interpreters, we're still trying to figure out how can interpreters work under a referral agency where it's a true referral agency and not a broker, a labor broker. That seems to be the difference, right? How much level of control, how much money is that person taking out of your wages in order for you to do your work? Are you truly an independent, your own small business? And I want to remind people, one of the things we did in this bill is we took the business to business exemption and we put it at the top because that's the first thing people should look at. And that is very clear. You could be a sole proprietor, you can, be a corporation, you could be an LLC, and if you satisfy those terms where you truly are acting as an independent, and a lot of translators right now and some interpreters are working under those conditions. That's the first thing that you might not even need an exemption. But with the interpreters, we're continuing to try to have these conversations. Is there a standard? Is there the certified interpreters? Is that different because they have a different ability? And in my own community, I can tell you, we use a lot of interpreters in my community, as you can imagine, right? There's a set of interpreters who work not only as interpreters, but they're also hiring other interpreters, and there's a hierarchy. So if you get to the end of the hierarchy, the last interpreter hired, who's been hired through a broker and then hired through this person, they're getting very little money for what they're doing, and those are the interpreters that came to me and said, please don't exempt interpreters. So it's a balance, and we're trying to get there. We're going to get there on some, but to suggest, somebody who said, I heard from this interpreter, so I want a full exemption. I did kind of find that offensive because I have been working on this, and I know the rhetoric, and I know the things that have been waged, but you guys also know me, and I'm not blaming you, but come on, I'm not just picking powerful lobbyists. That's ridiculous. Some people who didn't get exemptions have very good lobbyists. Some people who got exemptions had no lobbyists. We actually tried to do our best, and we're continuing to do it by looking at the case law, looking at past practice in misclassification under Borello. A worker should not have to go through hoops and hoops and hoops to prove misclassification when they're clearly misclassified. That's what this bill was supposed to do. At the same time, people are truly their own business we're trying to take care of. So I'm going to continue to work on it. If there's a particular issue, any member, even if they're total jerks to me out in public, can come to my office. I've never denied a member a meeting, ever. And some, Republicans as well as Democrats have come and spent a lot of time with me on these. So I welcome you. I welcome anyone who has these issues. And I just ask that you walk through the decision, the court decision with me. I ask that you walk through the legitimate reasoning that we used and see, okay, okay, how do we end out this way, and how do we narrowly scope this so we don't have workers laying out there who are the losers? That's what I bring most up.
And make no mistake, and I appreciate that, and I think, my concern is that you kind of touched on it, is you made the statement that you're going through this systematically, and I think that's for us, and for me personally, I've been vice chair of labor since I've been elected, and it's a great committee to sit on to address these issues, but I want to, and maybe this is a conversation for you and I to have offline, of what is that systematic approach that we're going through, right? Because I do think that while we're dealing with these issues, there may be industries out here that are just kind of left out here floating, that run into trouble, and it's not really the intention of what we want to deal with, right? And I understand what you're doing with misclassification, and I am going to be supporting this bill today, because I think it's important that we go through 85 and start putting the pieces back together again under not with protecting employees as well. So anyways, Chair, appreciate your time.
And just for an abbreviated version, because I know a lot of people watching this, they don't understand. So we took the Dynamics ruling and all the rationale that they used, and they talked a lot about barrier to entry into a field. And so we talked a lot about that. Do you need a specialized degree? Do you need a specialized certification? Because when you add those on top of just being an individual, you're less likely to be exploited because it's harder to get into that. For example, doctors and lawyers. Everybody said, well, why did you exempt them? Well, historically, you can't just wake up one day and say, I'm a doctor, right? So we know that they have the ability to negotiate for themselves. They have control over their own ability to negotiate and their own work. That's an important feature, was an important feature under Umbrella, having control of the job you're doing. If you're truly an independent contractor, historically, that's what it was. We looked at past wage orders, right? So there are existing wage orders that have exemptions for folks. That's how we got commercial fishermen. I mean, where would I come up with commercial fishermen? Well, that's been in the law for 60 years as a wage order. So we went through all of the wage orders to say what had already been gone through and why these special circumstances kind of existed. And there are a number of wage orders out there that we tried to line up the bill with. And then we went through past misclassification. Have people historically been employees, and businesses are now just making them independent contractors, and so they're losing rights under kind of some new form of what we believe an independent contractor is. We all the way through, and most folks, you can kind of, when you go through that, you get stuck, right? You're like, that's why I said when I got told last night, like, hey, a constituent emailed, let me explain to you certification for translators. It's only in Spanish. Okay, that's a problem, right? Because we want to try to get translators who act independently the ability to do that. But suddenly you're telling me there's no barrier to entry. What is that barrier then? Can anyone be a translator? Because if not, you're going to have a labor pool that's extremely large and thus vulnerable to exploitation, right? So I'm trying. I don't want anyone to lose money. I don't want anyone to lose their wages. I don't want to mess up anybody's small business, but we also have to ensure that this is pure to the decision. It's pure to, the history of these professions. And, it took a long time to get to music. That's what's one of these things. That took the unions, the independent artists, the record industry, and it was a lot. But we're committed to doing that work. I think picking exemptions and just throwing them out there is not the way to go if we want to withstand as we have. And I just want to point this out because the photographers and journalists said, they have a lawsuit. Well, that lawsuit was thrown out by the courts, as has every lawsuit been challenging AB5 except truckers, and that's a preemption suit. And so that's fine. It's on appeal to hear the lawsuit because the judge in particular says AB5 doesn't directly regulate or prohibit speech, but regulates the employment relationship, and that is legal under the California Constitution and the U.S. Constitution. So, but we want to not be random and give random exemptions, and so that's why we go through this process, and why I think it was a little offensive for people to be introducing bills without going through the same process the courts went through, that our legal system goes through, that our agencies go through, and that historically California has already established. Thank you, though.
Thank you. Senator Deep, did you have a comment? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too intend on voting for AB 1850 today, and I also want to acknowledge Assemblymember Gonzalez